The gunshot echoed across the valley like a sudden clap of thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the azure Colorado sky. Norris pulled back on the reins of his dappled gray stallion, Storm, and cocked his head to listen. It was the summer of 1873, and in this corner of the frontier, unexpected gunfire rarely signaled anything good. Reed had been riding for 3 days straight, leaving behind the bloody memories of Dodge City and the reputation that had begun to weigh on him like a lead blanket. At 32, with a face weathered by sun and sorrow, he was seeking something he couldn't name peace, perhaps, or at least a stretch of days without having to draw his Colt. Another shot cracked the stillness, followed by the distant sound of men's voices raised in anger. Reed hesitated only a moment before turning Storm toward the commotion. He'd promised himself no more fighting, but some habits died harder than others. Cresting a small rise, he saw the confrontation playing out below him. A modest homestead, a weathered but sturdy cabin, a small barn, and fields of what looked like wheat and corn stretching out behind was under siege. 5 riders circled the property, their horses kicking up dust clouds as they whooped and hollered. On the porch stood a lone figure, a woman with a rifle raised defiantly at the intruders. Even from this distance, Reed could tell she was outmatched. 1 woman against 5 men, the odds made his jaw clench. He watched as one of the riders fired a shot into the air, then pointed menacingly at the cabin. "Last chance, Mrs. Morrison," the man's voice carried on the wind. "Either sell to us now or there won't be nothing left to sell by sundown," the woman misses. Morrison raised her rifle and fired, the shot going wide but making her position clear. The leader of the group laughed, the sound ugly and promising violence. Reed's hand moved to the worn grip of his Colt. He'd seen this scene play out before, had watched good people driven from their homes by men who confused might with right. He'd vowed to keep riding, to leave other folks' troubles behind him. But as he watched the woman standing alone against impossible odds, something shifted in his chest. Before he could reconsider, Reed urged Storm forward, his decision made. As he approached, he kept his posture relaxed, though his senses were sharp as a hawk's. The 5 men turned toward him, their expressions moving from surprise to wariness. Reed tipped his hat politely, taking their measure. They were a rough-looking bunch-trail-hardened men with mean eyes and meaner intentions. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Reed called, his voice carrying the easy drawl he'd cultivated over years of talking himself into and out of trouble. "Seems like you're causing this lady some distress." The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "This ain't your business, stranger. Best ride on while you still can." Reed smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Now see, that's where we disagree. I've never been too good at riding past trouble." He shifted slightly in his saddle, his duster falling open just enough to reveal the gleaming Colt at his hip. "Maybe you boys could explain what's got you so interested in this particular piece of land." The leader's eyes narrowed as he assessed Reed more carefully, noting the way he sat his horse, the confidence in his bearing, the weathered gun belt that spoke of regular use. "Morrison land sits on the route the railroad's planning. Widow's been too stubborn to sell." His gaze flicked to the woman on the porch. "We're just helping her see reason." Reed looked past them to the woman. She stood tall despite her obvious fear, her rifle still trained on the men, though her arms must be aching from holding it at the ready. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, had come loose from its pins and blew around a face that showed both determination and exhaustion. "Madam," he called, not taking his eyes off the 5 riders. "You all right?" "I've been better," she replied, her voice steadier than he might have expected. "These men work for the Blackwater Mining Company. They've been trying to force me off my land for months." Reed nodded slowly, his mind calculating distances, angles, odds. 5 against 1 weren't good odds, but he'd faced worse. "Well now, that doesn't sound very neighborly." He returned his attention to the leader. "I'm thinking you boys might want to reconsider your approach here." The leader's hand drifted toward his gun. "And who might you be to tell us our business?" Name's Reed Norris. He didn't elaborate, but something in his tone made 2 of the men exchange uneasy glances. "Norris," one of them muttered. The Reed Norris from Kansas. Reed didn't confirm or deny, just kept his easy smile in place while his eyes stayed cold and watchful. His reputation had a way of doing half his work for him these days. The leader's expression darkened. Don't care if you're the devil himself. This land's going to be ours, one way or another. He nodded to his men. Teach him some manners, boys. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. The first man went for his gun, but Reed was faster, his Colt clearing its holster in a fluid motion born of years of practice. He fired once, the bullet finding the man's shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse with a howl of pain. The second and third men fired almost simultaneously, but Reed had already shifted Storm sideways, the bullets whistling past. His return shots found their marks, one in a man's thigh, another grazing an arm, not killing shots, but enough to take them out of the fight. The fourth man's horse reared in panic, throwing its rider before bolting away. As the man scrambled to his feet, the woman on the porch finally found her target, her rifle shot kicking up dirt inches from his boots. He froze, hands raised. The leader, realizing how quickly the tide had turned, drew his own weapon, but Reed had him in his sights before his gun cleared leather. I wouldn't, Reed said quietly. For a tense moment, the man seemed ready to risk it all, but then sense prevailed. Slowly, deliberately, he eased his gun back into its holster. This isn't over, he growled. You've no idea who you're dealing with. Reed kept his Colt steady. I suggest you collect your men and ride out, and when you report back to whoever sent you, let them know this land is protected now. The leader glared hatefully, but he was pragmatic enough to recognize defeat. He whistled sharply, and the wounded men began limping toward their horses. The one who'd been thrown caught his mount, which had stopped a short distance away. Blackwater won't forget this, the leader warned as they prepared to depart. Neither will I. Reed watched impassively as they helped their wounded onto horses and rode away, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were distant specks on the horizon did he holster his weapon and turn his attention to the woman. She had lowered her rifle, her shoulders sagging slightly with relief or exhaustion or both. Up close, Reed could see that she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her mid-20s, with eyes the clear blue of a mountain lake and a dusting of freckles across her nose. Madam, he said, dismounting and approaching the porch with his hat in his hands, Reed Norris at your service. Rebecca Morrison, she replied, her voice soft but steady. And I thank you for your help, Mr. Norris, though I didn't ask for it. Reed smiled slightly. No, madam, you didn't, but 5 against 1 didn't seem like fair odds. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he represented a new kind of threat. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. You'd better come inside, Mr. Norris. Those men will be back, and we should talk about what happens next. Reed followed her into the cabin, which was simple but neat, with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and shelves lined with books more than he'd expected to see in a frontier home. A photograph on the wall showed Rebecca with a tall, solemn-faced man, presumably the late Mr. Morrison. How long have they been coming around? Reed asked, accepting a cup of coffee from her. Rebecca sighed, pushing back a strand of hair. Started about 3 months after Thomas died. That was nearly a year ago now. Her fingers twisted a simple gold band on her left hand. At first, it was just offers to buy. When I refused, the offers turned to threats. Reed nodded. It was an old story on the frontier, powerful interests using any means necessary to acquire land they wanted. And the law, a bitter smile crossed her face. Sheriff Payton owns shares in Blackwater Mining. He's been too busy to help. Reed took a thoughtful sip of coffee. Why not sell, start fresh somewhere else? Her eyes flashed with sudden fire. This land was Thomas's dream. We came out here with nothing but hope in each other. He died building this place, her voice caught, but she continued. Died defending it from a mountain lion that was after our livestock. I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up to men who only see its value in dollars. Reed could respect loyalty, even to a memory. What do you grow here? Wheat mostly, some corn. I have a vegetable garden out back, 6 milk cows, a dozen chickens. She gestured vaguely toward the window. It's not much, but it's mine and I can work it myself. Reed raised an eyebrow, doubting that last claim. A farm this size would be challenging for a single man, let alone a woman on her own. But he didn't question her further on that point. "Those men will be back," he said instead. "And next time they'll bring more guns." Rebecca's shoulders straightened. "I know, but I won't leave." Reed studied her for a long moment. He'd planned to ride on, to put as much distance as possible between himself and his past. But something about Rebecca Morrison's quiet courage touched something inside him he'd thought long dead. "I could stay a few days," he heard himself say. "Help shore up your defenses, maybe talk to some folks in town, see what can be done about Blackwater." Surprise flickered across her face. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Reed set his empty cup down, considering his answer. "Let's just say I've seen too many good people pushed aside by those with more money and guns. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I've got nowhere particular to be." Suspicion darkened her eyes. "What do you want in return, Mr. Norris?" "Nothing you're not willing to give, Mrs. Morrison," he answered honestly. "A place to sleep, maybe some of that coffee in the morning. I'll earn my keep." She seemed to weigh his words against some internal scale before nodding slowly. "The barn has a clean loft with fresh hay. It's yours as long as you need it." Reed stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll see to my horse, then take a look around your property if that's all right. Best to know what we're defending." Rebecca nodded. "I'll prepare supper, and Mr. Norris." She met his gaze steadily. "Thank you." Reed tipped his hat and stepped back into the afternoon sun, leading Storm toward the barn. As he walked, he wondered at the impulse that had made him offer to stay. It had been a long time since he'd put down roots anywhere, even temporarily. Longer still since he'd let himself care about someone else's troubles. But as he glanced back at the cabin, at the woman framed in the doorway watching him go, he couldn't quite bring himself to regret the decision. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Reed rose before dawn each morning, checking the perimeter of the property before Rebecca was even awake. He repaired fences, reinforced doors and windows, and created defensive positions should Blackwater's men return in force. In the afternoons, he helped with the farm work tasks that clearly would have overwhelmed a single person, no matter how determined. Rebecca proved to be as hardworking as she was proud. She never complained, never asked for help directly, but accepted it with quiet gratitude when offered. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in blazing oranges and pinks. Sometimes they talked about the land, about the coming harvest, about the books she loved to read. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence. Reed found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken of in years. About growing up in Missouri, about learning to shoot from his father, about drifting west after the war with nothing but his horse and his gun. He didn't tell her everything, not about the men he'd killed or the nightmares that sometimes woke him sweating in the darkness. But he told her enough that she began to see him as more than just a gun for hire. On the fourth day, Reed rode into town to gather information and supplies. Millerville was a dusty collection of wooden buildings strung along a single main street: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses catering to the farmers and ranchers of the area. He tethered Storm outside the general store and went inside, aware of the curious glances from locals who recognized a stranger in their midst. The storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, eyed him cautiously. "Help you, mister?" "Need some supplies," Reed said easily, placing a list on the counter: ammunition, coffee, flour, and other essentials. As the man gathered the items, Reed engaged him in casual conversation, learning what he could about Blackwater mining and their operations in the area. "They've been buying up land all through the valley," the storekeeper confided after determining Reed wasn't affiliated with the company. "Offering fair prices at first, but when folks refuse," he shrugged eloquently. "Accidents happen, fires start, people decide it's better to sell after all." "And the law allows this?" Reed asked, though he already knew the answer. The storekeeper snorted. "Sheriff's in their pocket, so's the mayor and half the town council. Only ones who have stood firm are the Morrison widow and old man Peterson out by the creek." He paused, studying Reed more carefully. You staying out at the Morrison place, aren't you? Words gotten around. Reed nodded, not surprised that news traveled fast in a small community. Just helping out for a spell. The man leaned forward, lowering his voice. Best be careful. Blackwater doesn't like interference. They've got hired guns coming in from Denver, I heard. Mean ones. Reed thanked him for the warning and paid for his supplies. As he stepped back onto the boardwalk, he noticed a group of men outside the saloon watching him with open hostility. One of them, sporting a bandage on his shoulder, was among the riders he'd confronted at Rebecca's farm. Ignoring them, Reed secured his purchases to Storm's saddle. He was just about to mount up when a voice called out behind him. You the one who's been playing hero out at the Morrison place. Reed turned slowly to face a tall, expensively dressed man flanked by two obvious gunmen. The fine cut of his suit and the gold watch chain across his vest marked him as someone of means, likely a Blackwater representative. I don't believe we've been introduced, Reed replied calmly. The man smiled thinly. Preston Blackwater. This is my town, my valley, and soon enough my railroad will run right through the middle of it, he gestured expansively. Progress, Mr. Norris, Reed supplied. Reed Norris. Something flickered in Blackwater's eyes, recognition, perhaps. Mr. Norris, I understand you've taken a personal interest in the widow Morrison's situation. Just helping a neighbor. Blackwater chuckled, the sound entirely without humor. Neighborly indeed. Well, let me be neighborly in return and offer you some advice. The Morrison property will be mine, one way or another. The sensible thing would be for you to ride on and let business matters be settled by businessmen. Reed met the man's gaze steadily. And if I don't find that advice particularly compelling, Blackwater's smile disappeared. Then I'm afraid Mrs. Morrison might find herself not just widowed, but utterly alone in this world. A dangerous situation for a woman. Reed felt a cold anger settle in his stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. Threatening a woman doesn't strike me as the mark of a gentleman, Mr. Blackwater. This is the frontier, Mr. Norris. Gentlemen are in short supply. Blackwater adjusted his gloves with deliberate care. You have until the end of the week to clear out. After that, I can't guarantee anyone's safety, yours or hers. With that, he turned and walked away, his men following in his wake. Reed watched them go, calculating odds and possibilities. The situation had just become considerably more dangerous, but oddly enough, he found himself even more determined to stay. As he rode back to Rebecca's farm, he considered what he'd learned. Blackwater wasn't just a mining company. It was Preston Blackwater himself, a man who seemed willing to go to any lengths to get what he wanted. The coming confrontation would be not just about land, but about power and principle. Rebecca was waiting on the porch when he returned, her expression anxious until she saw him riding up the path. Something in his chest tightened at the relief that washed over her face. I was worried, she admitted as he dismounted. You were gone longer than expected. Reed handed her the supplies. Had an interesting conversation in town, met your adversary. Alarm flashed in her eyes. Preston Blackwater, he nodded, following her into the cabin. He made it clear he's not giving up, said he's bringing in more men by the end of the week. Rebecca set the packages down on the table, her hands trembling slightly. I won't sell, Reed. I can't. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it affected him more than he cared to admit. I'm not suggesting you should, but we need to prepare for what's coming. She turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his face. Why are you still here? This isn't your fight. Reed found himself stepping closer to her, drawn by something he couldn't name. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm tired of watching men like Blackwater take whatever they want without consequences. Is that the only reason? She asked quietly, and there was something in her voice of vulnerability, a hope that made his heart beat faster. No, he admitted. That's not the only reason. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then Rebecca looked away, busying herself with the supplies. I should start dinner. Reed nodded, respecting her retreat. I'll check the fences before dark. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of stew and fresh bread, Reed laid out his plan. We need more guns on our side. I was thinking about riding over to the Peterson place tomorrow, see if he'd be willing to stand with us. Rebecca stirred her stew thoughtfully. Jacob Peterson was a friend of Thomas's. He might help, but he's in his 60s and has a bad leg from the war. Still, another gun and another pair of eyes would make a difference. Reed hesitated, and there might be others in the valley willing to take a stand if someone leads the way. Against Blackwater, I doubt it. Bitterness tinged her voice. Most people around here are either in his pocket or too afraid to cross him. Fear can be overcome, Reed said gently, especially when people realize they're not standing alone. Rebecca studied him across the table. You've done this before, haven't you? Stood against powerful men. Reed's mouth twisted in a wry smile. A time or two, not always successfully. Is that why you were riding through these parts? Running from something? Not running, Reed corrected. Just looking for somewhere different, somewhere quiet. Rebecca laughed softly. Well, you certainly found that here, at least until recently. Her laughter, rare as it was, warmed him more than the fire crackling in the hearth. I don't regret stopping, he said, more honestly than he'd intended. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Reed could see past the widow's grief to the woman beneath strong, intelligent, and more alone than she deserved to be. He found himself wondering what it would be like to see her truly smile, to hear her laugh without the shadow of worry darkening her eyes. The next day, Reed rode to the Peterson farm and found a willing ally in the grizzled old veteran. Jacob Peterson had indeed been a friend of Thomas Morrison's and harbored his own grudge against Blackwater for repeated attempts to force him off his land. Been expecting them to make a move on Rebecca's place, Peterson growled, pouring Reed a generous measure of homemade whiskey. Thomas wasn't in the ground a month before Blackwater sent his first offer. Vultures, the lot of them. Reed sipped the potent liquor. Blackwater's bringing in hired guns by the end of the week. We need to be ready. Peterson's weathered face hardened. Count me in. And I know a couple of others who might be willing to help folks who have lost land to Blackwater or are afraid they might be next. By nightfall, Reed had secured promises from 4 more men, small farmers and ranchers who had suffered Blackwater's pressure tactics and were ready to take a stand. It wasn't a large force, but it was better than facing Blackwater's men alone. When he returned to Rebecca's farm, he found her sitting on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Any luck?" she asked. Reed sat beside her on the weathered bench. "Peterson's with us. So are the Johnson brothers, Frank Miller and Bill Taylor. They'll be here by tomorrow afternoon." Relief softened her features. "Thank you, Reed. I never expected." She trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "Never expected someone to care enough to help," he finished for her. She nodded, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "After Thomas died, it was like the world just moved on. People were kind at first, but then they went back to their lives, and I was left alone with his memory and this land." Reed hesitated, then reached out to cover her hand with his own. Her fingers were rough from farm work, but they felt small and warm beneath his palm. "You're not alone now." Rebecca turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. They sat in silence as twilight deepened into night, the first stars appearing in the velvet sky. Neither spoke of what might happen when Blackwater's men came, or of the fragile connection growing between them. For now, it was enough to sit together in the quiet, holding on to a moment of peace before the storm. The next 2 days were a flurry of preparation. Peterson arrived with a wagon of supplies and a Winchester rifle that had seen action at Shiloh. The Johnson brothers, Sam and Ethan, brought their own weapons and helped Reed construct barricades around the house and barn. Frank Miller, a soft-spoken man with a deadly aim, took up position in the hayloft, while Bill Taylor, a former cavalry scout, volunteered to watch the approaches to the farm. Rebecca moved among them like a general, providing food and coffee, offering suggestions about the land's features that might provide tactical advantages. Reed watched her with growing admiration. The timid widow was gone, replaced by a woman of strength and purpose. On the evening of the 6th day, Reed found Rebecca standing at the edge of her wheat field, watching the setting sun paint the stalks with golden light. He approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on her solitude, but she sensed his presence and turned. "It will be tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "I can feel it," Reed nodded. "We're as ready as we can be." Rebecca's gaze returned to the swaying wheat. "Thomas and I planted these fields together, our first crop." He was so proud when the shoots first broke through the soil. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was warm. "Sometimes I think I should have sold after he died, gone back east to my sister in Boston." "Why didn't you?" Reed asked gently. She was silent for a long moment before answering. "At first it was just stubbornness, a refusal to admit that I couldn't manage alone, then it became about honoring Thomas's dream." She turned to face Reed fully. "But lately I've realized it's also about me. This is my home now, my land, my life. I won't let Blackwater or anyone else take it from me." Reed felt a surge of pride at her words. "We'll stop them," he promised. Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes searching his face in the fading light. "And after? What happens after, Reed?" It was a question he hadn't allowed himself to consider fully. What came after the fight was done, win or lose. Would he ride away as he'd always done before? Or was there something here with this woman and this land that could hold him? "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been drifting so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place." A sad smile touched her lips. "We're both a little lost, I think." Reed reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that surprised even him. "Maybe, or maybe we're finally found." Rebecca's breath caught, and for a moment, Reed thought he might kiss her. He wanted to with an intensity that startled him, but the time wasn't right, not with danger looming and the future uncertain. Instead, he offered her his arm. "We should get back, early day tomorrow." She nodded, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. They walked back to the house in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow might bring and what might lie beyond it. Dawn broke clear and bright, the rising sun casting long shadows across the yard as Reed and the others took their positions. Rebecca had refused to leave despite Reed's urging, insisting on defending her home alongside them. She now stood on the porch, a shotgun in her hands, her face set with determination. They didn't have to wait long. Just after 8 o'clock, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger as a column of riders approached. Reed counted at least 15 men, Preston Blackwater himself at their head. The mining magnate was dressed as if for a business meeting, incongruous among the rough-looking gunmen that surrounded him. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house. Blackwater urged his horse forward a few paces, his expression one of mild disappointment rather than anger. "Mrs. Morrison," he called, "I see you've chosen to be difficult. I had hoped we could resolve this matter civilly." Rebecca stepped forward, her shotgun at the ready. "There's nothing civil about threatening a woman off her own land, Mr. Blackwater." Blackwater sighed theatrically. "Progress requires sacrifices, my dear. Your little farm stands in the way of a railroad that will bring prosperity to this entire region." He gestured to the men with him. "I've brought the proper incentives to help you understand the importance of cooperation." Reed moved to stand beside Rebecca, his Colt drawn but held casually at his side. "The lady's not interested in selling Blackwater. I suggest you take your men and ride out." Blackwater's gaze hardened as it shifted to Reed. "Mr. Norris, I see you've ignored my friendly advice." His eyes scanned the property, noting the defensive positions, the armed men waiting behind barricades and in windows. "And you've brought friends, how touching." "Last chance," Reed said evenly. "Leave now and nobody gets hurt." A cold smile spread across Blackwater's face. "I think not. You see, this land will be mine. The only question is whether Mrs. Morrison accepts my final offer of $3,000, or whether I take possession of a property with no one left to claim it." He raised his hand, a signal to his men. "You have 1 minute to decide, Mrs. Morrison, then my men will do what they're paid to do." Rebecca's hands tightened on her shotgun. "I've already decided, Mr. Blackwater. This is my home and I'm not leaving." Blackwater's face darkened with anger. "Then you've sealed your fate." He wheeled his horse around and rode back to his men, giving sharp instructions that carried on the morning air. Reed positioned himself in front of Rebecca. "Get inside," he urged. "Use the window we reinforced." She nodded grimly and retreated to the house as Reed moved behind a stack of crates they'd positioned for cover. Along the perimeter of the yard, Peterson and the others tensed, weapons ready. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Blackwater's arm dropped and his men charged forward, guns blazing. The battle erupted with a fury that shattered the peaceful morning. Bullets splintered wood and thudded into earth. Reed fired methodically, each shot finding its mark. 2 of Blackwater's men fell from their horses in the first volley. A third clutched his arm, wheeling away from the fight, but Blackwater's force had numbers on their side. They split into groups, some providing covering fire while others circled toward the barn and the rear of the house. Peterson and Frank Miller concentrated on these flanking riders, forcing them to seek cover behind a water trough. Rebecca fired from the window, her shotgun blast catching one man in the leg as he tried to reach the porch. He crawled back, cursing viciously. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than 15 minutes. Smoke hung over the yard, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. Reed was down to his last few bullets when he noticed a movement to his right. 2 of Blackwater's men had worked their way around to the side of the house and were preparing to throw something through a window. "Fire!" he shouted in warning, breaking cover to run toward them. He fired twice, hitting one man in the shoulder. The other turned to face him, a burning torch in his hand. Reed tackled him before he could throw it, the 2 of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The torch fell nearby, its flames licking at the dry grass. Reed landed a solid punch to the man's jaw, then scrambled for the torch, stomping out the flames before they could spread. When he looked up, he found himself staring into the barrel of Preston Blackwater's revolver. "Enough," Blackwater snarled, his elegant attire now dusty and disheveled. "You've cost me good men today, Norris. That debt will be paid." Reed tensed, calculating his chances of reaching his gun before Blackwater could fire. They weren't good. "Drop your weapon, Blackwater," Rebecca's voice rang out from behind the mining magnate. She stood on the porch steps, her shotgun aimed squarely at his back. "Or I'll put a hole in you big enough to drive a wagon through." Blackwater froze, his eyes never leaving Reed. "You don't have the nerve, Mrs. Morrison." "Try me," Rebecca replied, her voice steady as stone. "You've threatened my home, endangered my friends, and now you're about to murder a good man in my yard. I have every right to defend what's mine." Around the property, the gunfire had died down. Blackwater's remaining men were either wounded, captured, or holding their position, uncertain what to do as their employer stood at gunpoint. "It's over, Blackwater," Reed said quietly. "Tell your men to throw down their weapons." Fury contorted Blackwater's features. For a moment, Reed thought the man might pull the trigger anyway, accepting his own death as the price for revenge. Then slowly the fight seemed to drain out of him. He lowered his gun. "Stand down," he called to his men. "Stand down." One by one, the remaining gunmen dropped their weapons. Peterson and the others emerged from their positions, covering the defeated attackers with their rifles. Rebecca kept her shotgun trained on Blackwater as Reed relieved him of his revolver. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice betraying exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. Before Reed could answer, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the direction of town. A dozen riders appeared, led by a tall man wearing a badge Sheriff Peyton, presumably along with what looked like a hastily assembled posse. "What the hell is going on here?" the sheriff demanded, surveying the scene with evident shock. Bodies lay in the dust, wounded men groaned, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. "Self-defense, Sheriff," Reed answered coolly. "Mr. Blackwater and his men attacked Mrs. Morrison's property with intent to burn her out or worse." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Blackwater, and Reed could see the conflict in the man's eyes, his allegiance to the powerful businessman warring with the undeniable evidence before him. "That true, Preston?" he asked uneasily. Blackwater's face was a mask of cold fury. "This is a private business matter that got out of hand, nothing for you to concern yourself with. 15 armed men attacking a widow's farm is hardly a business matter," Reed countered. He gestured to the men from town who had stood with them. "Ask any of these gentlemen. They witnessed the whole thing." The sheriff looked uncertain, his hand hovering near his gun as he tried to assess the situation. Reed tensed, preparing for another fight if necessary, but then an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Bill Taylor, the former cavalry scout, stepped forward. "Sheriff, I've got something you should see." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "Found this on one of Blackwater's men when we disarmed him. It's a deed to the Morrison property, already filled out and dated yesterday, just waiting for a signature." He handed it to the sheriff. "Looks to me like Blackwater was planning to force Mrs. Morrison to sign over her land or forge her signature if she was no longer in a position to object." The sheriff examined the document, his expression growing troubled. He looked at Blackwater with new eyes. "This true, Preston? Were you planning to forge a deed?" Blackwater remained silent, his jaw clenched tight. The sheriff sighed heavily, then straightened his shoulders. "Preston Blackwater, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted arson, and assault with deadly intent." He nodded to his deputies. "Take him into custody. Round up the rest of his men, the ones that can ride anyway. The wounded can be treated in town before they see the inside of a cell." As Blackwater was led away, he fixed Reed with a venomous glare. "This isn't over, Norris, not by a long shot." Reed met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it is, for now and for good." The cleanup took the rest of the day. The dead 4 of Blackwater's men were loaded onto a wagon for transport to town. The wounded were treated as best they could be before being sent to the doctor in Millerville. Peterson and the others who had stood with Reed and Rebecca counted their blessings, a few minor wounds among them, but no serious injuries. By sunset, the farm had been restored to some semblance of normalcy, though bullet holes in the walls and bloodstains on the ground remained as stark reminders of the day's violence. Reed found Rebecca sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the twilight landscape. He sat beside her, saying nothing, offering his presence as comfort. "Is it really over?" she asked finally. Reed considered the question. "Blackwater will likely face trial, though men like him have ways of avoiding the full consequences of their actions, but he's been exposed. The railroad will find another route, or another man will take over the project. Either way, I don't think you'll have trouble from that quarter again." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Thank you, Reed, for everything. I couldn't have done this alone." "You weren't alone," he reminded her gently. "Peterson and the others stood with you because they believed in what you were fighting for. They'll be your allies going forward. And you?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "What will you do now?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since the gunfire stopped. The old impulse to move on, to find another horizon, tugged at him. But alongside it was a newer, stronger desire to stay, to see what might grow in the fertile ground of this place with this woman. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether there's a reason for me to stay." Rebecca's eyes, luminous in the fading light, held his. "There is," she said softly, "if you want it." Reed reached out, taking her hand in his. "I've been running for a long time, Rebecca. From my past, from myself, from the possibility of caring too much about anyone or anything. I'm not sure I know how to stop." "Then don't think of it as stopping," she suggested. "Think of it as starting something new." The wisdom in her words struck him deeply. He'd been defining himself by what he was leaving behind for so long that he'd forgotten to consider what he might be moving toward. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Reed leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were soft beneath his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that kindled something long dormant within him. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his, her fingers entwined with his own. "Stay," she whispered. "Help me build something here, something good." Reed looked out at the land stretching before them, the wheat fields golden in the last light, the mountains purple against the darkening sky. He thought of the life he might have here, not as a gunfighter or a drifter, but as a farmer, a neighbor, perhaps someday a husband and father. "I'll stay," he promised, the words feeling right as they left his lips, "for as long as you'll have me." Rebecca's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "That might be a very long time, Mr. Norris." Reed laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I'm counting on it, Mrs. Morrison, I'm counting on it." As night fell fully over the Colorado Valley, they remained on the porch, planning their future in quiet voices. The land that had been defended with blood would now be nurtured with hope. And Reed Norris, who had ridden into Rebecca Morrison's life with nowhere to go, had finally found somewhere to stay, not just a place, but a person, a purpose, a home. In the years that followed, the Morrison farm flourished. Reed and Rebecca married that autumn, a simple ceremony with Peterson giving the bride away and the entire community gathering to celebrate. The railroad eventually came through, but it followed a different route, leaving the farm in peace. Reed hung up his gun belt, finding greater satisfaction in the weight of a plow in his hands than he'd ever found in the grip of his Colt. They had 2 children, a boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's clear blue eyes, and a girl with a spirit as wild as the western wind. And on summer evenings, Reed and Rebecca would sit on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had defended together, the love between them as enduring as the mountains on the horizon.